As Vadim mentioned, we have a new member, excuse me, Zainab Falk, and she is not here tonight, but you'll see her at our next meeting. Let's go around and do introductions. I want to preface my introduction. It's beautiful outside. I love the sun. I love everything about it, but I have asthma and I don't know what it is about this, but it's really bad for me, sadly. So my voice isn't very good. So Vadim is going to help out a lot tonight. So Ann Campbell, she, her pronouns. And if we could just go around, let's see, Vadim.
Vadim Ozerski, PCCEP member. Hi, everybody. And I will pass it on to Amy.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Anderson, and I'm the chair of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee.
And Barb.
Hi, everyone. My name is Barb Rainish. I'm a peer support specialist, community member, and PCCEP groupie. And am I passing?
Sure.
Jared.
Hi, everyone. Jared Hager, Assistant U.S. Attorney, he, him pronouns, and I'm here in my role as the monitor of the settlement agreement between the United States and the City of Portland. And I'll take the opportunity to pass it to my colleague, Jonas Geisler.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for hosting. I'm Jonas Geisler. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. I work for the Civil Rights Division of DOJ. And I also monitor the settlement agreement and have been around since the start of this case. Let's pass it on to Heidi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Heidi Brown. I'm with the Portland City Attorney's Office, and I'm the newly lead attorney for the DOJ settlement agreement on behalf of the city. Nice to see everyone tonight.
Okay, how about Bruce? Amy, would you like to introduce yourself? All right, let's go to Ben Hill. All right, how about Dennis Rosenbaum?
Thanks, Ann. Dennis Rosenbaum, he, him pronouns. I'm the compliance officer for the settlement agreement. Thank you.
Okay, how about Jonathan Levinson?
Jonathan Levinson, he, him. I cover policing for Oregon Public Broadcasting, and I guess I also monitor the settlement agreement.
Thank you for being here tonight. How about Brandon Farley?
I'm Brandon Farley. I'm a resident of Northwest Portland, and I've covered a lot of the protests recently, filming videography. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, how about Leah Dreben?
Hi, everyone. Leah Dreben, community member with some background in policing and criminal justice, interested in this work. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Let's see. If I haven't called your name, could you please unmute and introduce yourself?
Mary Claire Buckley, Portland Police Bureau Inspector General, and I facilitate the Bureau's compliance with the DOJ settlement agreement.
Thank you, Mary Claire.
Good evening, everyone. I am Claudia Claudio. I'm the project assistant for PCCEP, and I will be taking notes tonight, and I will also share my email with anyone that would like to get more info on PCCEP. Thank you for being here tonight.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and start our meeting. Excuse me. So tonight, our first item is the DOJ settlement agreement. We're going to talk about, in particular, just in general, the settlement agreement, also paragraph 150, and also the for partial compliance as noted in the agreement. And what I thought we'd do is we'd start out with just an overview by the city, Mary Claire Buckley, who's here on behalf of Portland Police Bureau. And then we would have time for both Jared and Jonas to share perspective and then open it up for questions for the community and members. So, Mary Claire, if you'd like to start out.
Were you looking for an overview of the settlement agreement itself?
I'm looking for, well, we're specifically going to kind of talk in depth a bit about paragraph 150, but we would like just an overview of possibly the 4 areas of partial compliance.
Well, I have with us tonight Heidi, who might want to speak to that.
Thank you, Mary Claire.
And then if, you know, then if you want to talk about specific about 150, I'd be happy to talk about what the Bureau did.
Sounds great.
So just, is it helpful, and would you like me to just briefly respond? I understand you want to ask about partial compliance, and I guess just because we're currently in a state where the Department of Justice has issued a notice to the city of concern about substantial compliance, and we're in our period of 30 days that we're working on our response. So I'm not currently able to answer questions about that tonight, nor can the Bureau, but we will be issuing our formal response, our 30-day response, and we'll absolutely be sure that PCCEP has a copy of that.
Is it possible for you to give an overview of the DOJ settlement as it relates to the City of Portland and the Portland Police Bureau?
If you mean broadly speaking, like what the settlement agreement requires, sure, I'd be happy to. So the settlement agreement was entered into formally in 2014, and there were 7 general areas. Excuse the background noise, I apologize. There were 7 general areas of compliance, some of which have subcategories, but the general areas are use of force, training, officer accountability, the public engagement, and community engagement, and the Portland Committee on community engaged policing, and employee information system, which is just is a program for tracking concerns with officers that are less formal concerns, and community behavioral health intervention and crisis intervention. So those are the 7 broad areas that are covered by the settlement agreement. And between 2014 and January 10th of 2020, the city and the Portland Police Bureau made a number of changes and made movement to gain substantial compliance with those areas in the settlement agreement. And on January 10th of last year, the Department of Justice found the city in substantial compliance on all 7 areas and the subcategories within those areas. And then in February, as you are all aware, the Department of Justice issued its annual report. And of those 7 areas, there were 4 areas where the city was no longer in substantial compliance and was only in partial compliance. And then just going on April 2nd, the Department of Justice issued a letter to the city asking for a more formal response. as to how the city intends to get back into substantial compliance. And that's where we are today. And in 30 days from April 2nd or thereabouts, we will issue our formal response to that. Does that help, Anne, or is there more detail you would like me to get into?
Well, I think that we could go to questions, but we did have someone note that they're wondering about what we were talking about with paragraph 150. And I wanted to just read something out of the report, and then we'll open to questions. The city was unable to make obligations set forth in paragraph 150 to hold at least one meeting in each precinct area and at a city council meeting annually to present its annual report and to educate the community about its efforts in community policing in regard to the use of force and about PPB's policies and laws governing pedestrian stops and detentions and bias-free policing, including a civilian's responsibilities and freedoms in such encounters. The city cited to unforeseeable obstacles to holding, and it goes on to the reasons why. So that is kind of, I think we can get more clarity on that when Jared and Jonas present. But does anyone at this time have any questions so far? If you could raise your hand. Okay, I did have a question. I know that you're in a, as you said, a 30-day quiet period. Those are probably my words, or maybe those are yours, in response to the letter that the DOJ delivered to the city on April 2nd. And so in the 30 days, you will be writing a report in response to that. Will that letter be in response to all 4 areas of partial compliance?
So the Department of Justice letter on April 2nd addressed all areas of partial compliance, and so therefore the response will also address all 4 areas. So yes, short answer, and I just gave you the long answer.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't see any questions so far. So I'd like to move on to Jared and Jonas. I know that we're in this quiet period, but I was wondering if you could give any overview on the DOJ, actually in particular partial compliance issues.
Sure, happy to, Anne. You did a great job of reading the takeaway point on paragraph 150, and I don't mean to start in reverse order. Our findings are laid out in an executive summary and a full report that we published with the court and the public, and I believe it's on the PCCEP website. So, I encourage everyone to read that. In short, for community engagement, while we found that the city had maintained substantial compliance with the bulk of those community engagement provisions, and in particular, the support of this committee, which has been laudable, the city failed to comply with the terms of paragraph 150. And there were a couple of problems. The first with actually holding the 3 required precinct meetings, but there's also a question mark around the content of those meetings, given that the compliance officer, and we have Dennis and Amy here, and as well as the Department of Justice. Amy is located in Portland, as am I. We didn't receive invitations to those meetings and haven't been able to see video. So we don't know about the content, but there are 2 important parts of paragraph 150. The first is producing the annual report, and then the second is delivering it and taking public comment at these precinct meetings. And so we expect, and the city, I think, has a plan to comply with the terms of paragraph 150 in short order. And I think the expectation is that will happen before the end of the summer. But we think that there is a role for PCCEP to play in paragraph 150. You obviously review the annual report, but in terms of advertising these precinct meetings, attending, asking good questions, and really honing in on that content piece of discussing community policing efforts, discussing use of force and stops and detentions and bias-free policing and rights and responsibilities of citizens during police encounters. That's all very important information for the city to deliver to the public. And I think PCCEP can play a role in that as well. And I encourage you guys to do that. Jonas, did you want to talk about the issues with section 3 and 4 and 8?
Yes. With respect to use of force, as we outlined in the compliance assessment report filed with the court, Portland had a series of uses of force during the crowd control events, and our finding of partial compliance largely relies upon the crowd control events and the requirements both in the settlement agreement and PPB's own policies that are enacted pursuant to the settlement agreement. That they investigate the uses of force, they report the uses of force, and that the force itself be reasonable and within policy. We found that there were instances in which force was beyond policy, and we found that there were several instances in which supervisors failed to provide fulsome line level investigations of the uses of force. With respect to section 4 training, PPB was like a lot of other departments. They were affected by COVID. There were other things that also affected PPB. They had a budget cut and they relied upon their overtime budget in part for their training. Well, like many other departments, they couldn't complete their annual in-service requirement. They at first said that they would do online portion for all the classroom sections and then small groups for the practical skills, the hands-on type stuff, driving. Then they figured they couldn't do that owing to the crowd control event and their staffing of that. So it was about half of the officers that did not get a fulsome in-service training in 2020. PPB had planned in 2021 to catch up, if you will. So it's costing some hours in 2021, hours that might otherwise be spent on additional training, but it is a catch up of the prior training need from 2020. Section 8 has to do with accountability of officers. For accountability of officers, there were two things that we mentioned. One was the dominant determiner for why they're in partial compliance. The settlement agreement says they have 180 days from the allegation received by the police bureau or otherwise in the city to reaching a finding. And 180 days is plenty long in most instances to take care of an accountability investigation. They have the ability to toll the investigation if they need to, if there's a criminal investigation underlines, a district attorney holding it up, what have you, perfectly reasonable. But for IPR, the independent police review that conducts a large portion of the investigations, they did not meet the 180-day deadline in a significant number of their cases. And that alone places them in partial compliance. But as we also remarked in the executive summary, with the lack of supervisory investigations of use of force on the front end during the protests, you deprive the accountability process on the back end of the data necessary to have an effective accountability system. So that forecasts that the accountability system will indeed have difficulty in the absence of that data down the road. And that's come to fruition in some cases. As a thumbnail of compliance. I've pasted in the chat box for those who don't have chat open, the link to the findings letter that initiated this case from 2012 with the 3 main findings. And I've also pasted the table of contents from our compliance assessment report that we filed with the court February 10th of this year with the noted partial and substantial compliance ratings.
Thank you. I know that I have heard in the past at meetings, some officials saying that they were overwhelmed and with the protests, excuse me. I didn't mean to use the word riots. I didn't feel they were riots. with the protests, and that in effect, these are my words, that they will do better. Well, now we're having protests again. So I'm wondering, in terms of the being out of compliance and now possibly it's starting up again with the protests, and we still have the same issues of lack of training, possible force beyond policy. What happens in this situation while there's already a federal letter of complaint? Like, where are we within this process, because it's starting again?
Where are we within the process thing calls on two processes. One is where are we under the settlement agreement, and what is PPB doing right now? What PPB is doing is they're supposed to comply with the law and the policies and the settlement agreement. Even now, where are we under the settlement agreement? There's a process set forth in the end of the settlement agreement about enforcement, and it says the United States will give notice to the city of what the United States believes is less than substantial compliance. We've done that. We've given them the fulsome report in very excruciating detail on February 10th. It's a long document if you all would like to read it, 73 pages plus the executive summary. There are a lot of underlying documents that PPB also has access to because frankly, they provided us those documents. After we give them notice, then they have 30 days to respond. So that's that 30-day window that we're in right now. We may reasonably extend that if necessary. And then hopefully there's resolution. Hopefully they present a plan that says, these are the remedies that we believe will accommodate substantial compliance. And if we reach agreement, we can move forward on implementing those remedies. If we do not reach agreement at that point in time, then the parties go to a mediation. Mediation is where you have one neutral person in the room or persons, and that mediator helps guide the parties hopefully to an agreement. The agreement's by consensus. If the parties can't agree on who should mediate, then we go to Judge Simon and we each give 2 names to Judge Simon and say, please appoint a mediator. There's also a lengthy process. If after mediation we can't reach that consensus, then we are free to go forward to the court, to Judge Simon, and ask for the implementation of a remedy and file a motion.
And I just want to underscore, Ann, that just because the department has issued its notice on April 2nd, doesn't mean that we're not still assessing compliance with current activities. And so the Bureau's response, the city's response presently is under review. But the way, just the practical reality of this, and the compliance officer is also still presently reviewing Portland's compliance with the terms of the settlement agreement. That continues, although it's lagged a little bit. So I believe the next compliance officer report comes out in June or July, and that will obviously cover a portion of this year, and we'll just continue on. And so what's happening now will be under scrutiny.
Thank you. I know that this is the first time in 7 years that the Justice Department has issued a warning to Portland on use of force. So I'm hoping that they will work to remediation on this. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask?
Yes, I have a question, if you please. Wow, Jonas, when you were explaining it, I'm sitting here thinking, this sounds like an incredible business arrangement. And because of the process and due process and this and that, somehow I think the people are looking for like immediate results of change, which is not realistic. But what I wanted to say, which I thought, I've been thinking about this, I read the original document that was submitted for like when this whole thing began. And there has been so much improvements in our community since that original document was launched. I kind of wonder, would it be worth sometimes kind of going over some of those original findings and then showing people how the city has advanced, you know, since 2000, what was it, 11 or 10 when James was killed? Something like that? Or 9. When was he killed? It was 2010?
I believe it was 2009.
2009. Okay. And it took what, 5 years to get to a functionable like interaction between the police and DOJ. So that's 5 years. People continued, you know, to be unaware of the changes that have been going on since this whole thing began. And I just always like to look at both sides of everything to give perspective so that people know that the things the city is doing may not on the surface look like much, but when it ends up being in place, I'm thinking it's going to be better than what is already here. And so my question was, would you ever consider like doing I don't know what you call it, look back and looking at all the things that originally were in this report from DOJ and looking to the now? So we can kind of like close some of the loops about unity and about some of these other things that have majorly taken place. You know, where the mental health department is now under the physical health department and been there for like 5 years. So they've been running the show. You see, I think it gives a better reflection on the improvements our community has made. That's all I'm getting to.
It's an excellent point, Amy. And I just want to jump in and
Yeah.
you know, we've filed annual compliance reports for 5 or 6 years now, and you can see if you track those, the steady improvement. And you know, one area I like to emphasize to the city's credit is the crisis intervention.
Yeah.
Section 5 and 6 that the Bureau has and the city has complied with, and that's really a testament to, you know, the resolve of the city to make real improvements. And that's not just the Police Bureau; it's the Bureau of Emergency Communications.
Yes.
So you know, we do emphasize those in our report every year. We take a fresh look at each paragraph, and for several years now, the city has been in compliance with crisis intervention, and we see good results with the enhanced crisis intervention team. I think there is some, you know, more can be done, I think, to emphasize the good work that they do. And I know your subcommittee has done that, bringing in Lieutenant Hetman and talking about some of the success stories. But that is an important thing to underscore. This invitation tonight from this subcommittee was to talk about areas where there was partial compliance. I didn't mean to brush over some of the success stories, but we do call those out in the executive summary and in the full compliance report. And I think it's a good thing for PCCEP to call out too, because there have been successes.
Yeah, I just wanted the folks in the room who haven't been tracking this for a long time to understand that from the beginning, it was really ugly looking, and now it definitely looks much better. That's all I'm saying, you know, so not everybody reads all the documents.
Thank you, Amy. Barb?
So my question is what I posed earlier before the meeting, and I'm going to try to say it the best I can, which is that I'm interested in Jonas explaining, giving us a, you know, a quick primer on how the settlement agreement or the DOJ agreement with Portland differs from the other agreements that they have around the country with other municipalities. Not by way of how it's being watched over or what have you, that wasn't the right word, but the initial findings, since ours is based on the treatment of or mistreatment of people with mental, quote, illnesses. Not the words I like, but those are the words in the agreement. I know that. So does that make sense?
It does.
Thanks.
In the chat function, I've listed the 3 main findings and our original findings letter from 2012. Here's what we did. We asked the city for cooperation. They pledged cooperation in our investigation. They provided us a whole series of use of force reports they call force data collection reports, FDCRs, and after actions for a roughly 2-year period. We gathered that. We interviewed people all over the city at all types of different locations, city locations, non-city locations, homeless individuals, houseless individuals. We interviewed people in special interest groups. We interviewed people outside of special interest groups. We interviewed city employees and non-city employees. We accumulated all the data we could, and we used experts who are former police chiefs. We used attorneys who are experienced in this. I've been doing this for 17 years now. We applied the same sort of standard to this case as we did to other police cases in which there's an allegation of use of excessive force. In the end, instead of like other cases, let's take, for example, New Orleans, one with which I'm highly familiar. Instead of saying there is a general problem with use of force against everybody, and there's also a problem in that case with limited English proficient individuals, problem with search and seizure, problem with other areas, we said there were 3 main areas here. Excessive force against people experiencing a mental health crisis, excessive use of electronic control weapons against persons in or perceived to be in mental health crisis, and unnecessary escalation of force against persons in actual or perceived mental health crisis. We said when we presented to the court, when I did the initial fairness hearing to the court, the rising tide lifts all boats. You can go back to the transcript and see that. That is to say, if we're going to improve the systems on use of force and training and accountability and early warning systems for individuals in mental health crisis or perceived mental health crisis, then that system as a whole helps reduce the unnecessary use of force against individuals, whether or not they're in mental health crisis. It also affects the systems in other areas. We said in our findings letter that we had concerns with the provision of medical care directly after use of force. And we said in our findings letter that there were allegations that were brought to us about racial profiling, and that the city had at the time a plan for a study of racial profiling. And so we said, with the city, we entered an agreement and said, we will track not only the uses of force, but you should track all of your data and make it publicly available. And those provisions of the settlement agreement then allow individuals to assess the data themselves. So if they have an interest in racial profiling, search and seizure, what have you, those data now become available to the individuals in the community or the special interest groups or the plaintiff's attorneys or whomever want to pursue that. And that's fine. And if we needed to expand the investigation in that direction, we could have done so. But the primary focus of the remedy of this case has remained use of force. That is not to say that it doesn't help the other areas. It does help the other areas. I'll give you a specific example. We wrote about training, and we gave them a pretty hard time. Gave them a technical assistance letter about training and said, don't use us versus them. Don't try to perceive it's all police officers against the public. And have a more thoughtful process, come out with formal lesson plans. PPB turned around and improved their training. For that first aid portion alone, they trained their officers on how to use tourniquets and chest seals. And they went from a position where in our findings letter, we said we have real concern that people aren't getting provision of medical care after use of force, to saving people that they've shot. Quite frankly, if you recall, there's an individual who was accused of being a bank robber. He had a wallet that he had held like a gun, and they discharged a weapon. They went and put a chest seal on him and saved his life. There was an individual who was run over by a trash truck, and the PPV officers came and put on a tourniquet and saved his life. There was something like 7 individuals in 1 year on whom they used tourniquets and saved their lives. So our remedies relate to force, but look at the ships that rose with the tide there. There were lives saved. It's a good thing.
That's really cool, Jonas, and the way you explain it is really cool. So I guess what I'm taking from that is that no matter which city across the country or municipality you guys have looked into and found use of force issues having to do with anything, you've had the same approach to a broad remedy, a transparent remedy, etc. Because that's what I was sort of asking you, was was how the initial findings compared us with them, and I didn't hear an us and them, and I'm not talking about the training us with them.
Portland's findings are more narrow, its remedies are more narrow. There are agreements that are much broader. If one looks at the Albuquerque agreement or at the Newark agreement or the New Orleans agreement, you'll see a much broader remedy. And it's highly involved. There's a lot to track. There's a large monitoring team associated with that. But it was a broader finding, a broader constitutional and statutory problem to deal with.
And I'll just add that, the findings, though they're tied to people in mental health crisis or perceived to be in a mental health crisis, it's really only sections 5 and 6 of the agreement that are then so limited to address that particular group. When we talk about the force and the training and the accountability provisions, they apply broadly to everything. And the same with community engagement. I know there have been some people who want PCCEP to focus only on one issue or the other, but it's not so limited in that regard. There are specific remedies for the behavioral health unit, the enhanced crisis intervention team that are tied to the finding there, but a lot of the remedy is not so limited. It's broadly to all force, all training.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question?
This is Jonathan Levinson with OPB. I have a question, if I may. This question is for Heidi. DOJ outlined a number of instances in their letter where they assert PPB violated directives or interpreted directives in a way that did not comport with the Constitution. And I know the city disputes that they are required to provide a remediation plan. Does the city also dispute the policy violations that DOJ cited, or is it just the part of being required to provide a plan?
So Jonathan, the city actually is in the process of responding to the Department of Justice's letter, where they've notified us that they are consider us out of substantial compliance in our and this is the formal process to take us to court if we're found out of compliance. And so, as I said earlier, I can't really comment right now on how we'll be responding. We are working on our response actively as well, not right this second, as I was going to say as we speak, but I'm not really doing that. I'm paying attention to this right now. But generally speaking, we are working on this already. We're actively working on it as a city. And then we will reply to the issues raised by the Department of Justice. And I think their expectation is that we will reply to all the concerns that they've raised in their annual report and subsequently to that. So my expectation is that we'll respond to all those issues.
Could I just ask one more question? I understanding that you are limited in what you can say. Protests, depending on who you talk to, may or may not be picking up again. Is there anything that you can say to sort of reassure people that these same mistakes will not be, Jonas just said this is a slow process. Will these same mistakes be repeated in the next, week, 2 weeks, couple months while the city and DOJ sort this out?
Well, I think that the city is committed and has been committed to staying in substantial compliance with the settlement agreement. And last year we were overwhelmed with a number of things going on. Now, right now, we haven't experienced night after night after night going on for weeks on end of protests. And I'm going to knock on wood here and hope that we don't return to that experience. But the city in general and the police bureau are looking at and have considered ways that we can better deal with protest situations to address the Department of Justice's concerns. In particular, when you're talking about one of the big areas of underuse of force had to do with our properly tracking the use of force and analyzing that use of force and appropriately critiquing each use of force. And so we are certainly doing things and tried to put in things last summer as time went on to address these concerns. So without getting into the details of what all we're doing, because some of those things we are in process and some we're still figuring out. But absolutely, the city is working on ways to ensure that we don't remain out of substantial compliance. And I know I'm being vague, and I apologize. We'll be able to be more specific after we issue our response, and I do apologize for that for now.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a question kind of along the same lines. I know that crowd control training is an issue, and with COVID, training has stopped. And I know that was one issue that came to light over the summer. Has there been time to develop a new crowd control training program, and has that started?
Well, what I can say is that the Bureau is working on their crowd control training for this year, and Mary Claire Buckley can certainly expand on this, but for the people that had not attended the skills-based training, so folks received the classroom training. The Bureau was able to do that through a virtual format, but there is some skills-based hands-on scenario training that needs to occur, and that's the part that about half the folks needed it and did not attain it last year. And I believe that that's in process, and the Bureau hopes to have that completed, I believe, in the next couple months. So we should be caught up, and then we are looking at continuing our training and continuing on crowd control training with looking at lessons learned over the last year.
And we stopped training last year. We are back doing training. In January of this year, we began the 2021 in-service. Part of that was the makeup of last year's, obviously, that had to be halted due to COVID. But we are, once again, engaged in training and are in the process of developing the curriculum for the crowd control training that we intend to give likely beginning the 1st of June.
Thank you both. Is there anything you're doing in the interim before the crowd control training is presented in June? Keeping in mind that, I know we've had protests recently. Is there any way that you've thought to maybe do that section early, or are you still on your timeline for the June rollout of that?
Well, that training will be for the entire Bureau, and to develop it, to create the lesson plans that have to be reviewed by DOJ and COCL, and to get all the materials and get a schedule for 800 officers to pass through that in short order. Does take time. So that's and also our training calendar had already been full, so we're actually moving things in order to get this on our calendar as quickly as possible, because there were other things planned for the Bureau, but we've obviously adjusted things so that we can get to this as quickly as possible. But all the changes that were made during the course of last, from June to November, those changes obviously continue to be incorporated. So, there were lessons learned along the way of that 6-month protest period, and so those improvements that were made along the way obviously will be utilized in any protest that we face, either currently or in the near future, before all this before all of these crowd control training is done for the entire Bureau.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to ask a question?
Yes, please. I would like to ask, would the Bureau consider, or do they like not put people on front lines that don't have the training, or does everyone go out regardless of whether they're trained or not?
Well, Amy, there is a unit, a specific crowd control unit called RRT that is, goes through very specific training. There's also a group called the Mobile Field Force that gets training as well regarding, protest events. So, they're not they're not novices by any stretch of the imagination. The rapid response team really, although that isn't the only thing they do, it's not solely crowd control, but they actually are a designated group of officers who, have trainings, throughout the year usually and stuff like that. So they've been trained in a lot of the tactics and, techniques that are
So those are the
utilized.
only officers that go out to these scenes, is what you're saying? Is that?
Well, there's RRT is the major one. If
Right.
it turns into, either a civil disturbance or, a riot, there's also the mobile field force, which comes from the precinct, but those are individuals who also have been, designated as mobile field force members who would respond from the precincts if, RRT, wasn't, sufficient.
Okay, that sounds good. So then I'm just going to think that nobody untrained in this area will be responding to the call then.
Yeah, I mean, they've all had some training, some obviously more than others, but yes, we
Okay, that's
trained.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we at least know that the people responding are capable. So what they do with the knowledge of the training they already have. So if it becomes excessive, then you could honestly say that the trained individuals were actually using excessive force because they had full training and knowledge of what policy was, correct?
Well, all of those people online have supervisors too. And we have an incident command, and then there are levels all the way through down to the street. So there could be officers, there are sergeants on the street, there are lieutenants, and there's an incident commander for each one of these events and stuff. So they get their direction from, supervisors. They're not free to go out and do whatever they choose to do. There is direction as to what actions they would take in response to whatever the event is.
I will say, Amy, that the expectation of the city and the Bureau is that officers comply with the law, the constitutional standard regarding use of force, and with the city policies. And if we receive a complaint or have our own information that we see something, or an officer sees something, or we receive a complaint that somebody is not in compliance with our policies or with the law and the Constitution, then that is investigated and we take appropriate action to ensure that it doesn't happen anymore. So in response to your question, I think, if somebody is not complying with what we expect them to do under policy, law, and Constitution, then I would answer your question as, then yes, that would be a concern to us and we would investigate it. And if we found that they were acting out of policy, they would be held accountable for that. And
I just want to underscore, Amy, that paragraph 169, as part of the settlement agreement, the city has agreed to hold officers accountable for violating policy. And that's one area where we found partial compliance. And, that is the question, when there's violations of policy, are officers being held to account? That's a question of the settlement agreement as well as general constitutional principles.
Thank you.
Barb, you have another question?
Yeah, so following up just on that part of it, there had been a recommendation from, I think it was from the youth subcommittee, that the officers have number identification or identification that was big enough for people to see in order to actually be able to report anyone that's doing something they want to report, good or bad, I suppose. Where has that gone? Because I've heard through the grapevine it went nowhere, even though it was supposed to go somewhere.
Barb, your grapevine is failing you after that was made.
That's why I go to the horse's mouth, Mary. Claire.
That's okay. No, based on that, the Bureau issued a 3-digit number to every member that is not, that is singular to the officer and is not passed on when they leave or what have you. And so that 3-digit number is to be, and it's, I believe, I want to say 4 inches sticks in my mind, but I can get you the exact size. And it's put on their helmets, you know, on the front and the back of their helmets so that it can be seen from a distance so that they don't have to try and read anything on their chest or whatever. Because normally, and you know, as you've seen officers, they have their name tag and their badge number on the front, but you know, clearly that wasn't, you know, as visible in those kind of contexts. So yes, we did take that and everybody was issued that number, and during crowd control, all the helmets have to have that number clearly visible.
Thanks, Mary Claire.
You bet.
And Barb, I think the point bears some emphasis, because to the extent the city has to rely on complainants to make complaints about use of force, if that complainant isn't able to identify the officer, it really hamstrings the accountability process, and it leaves the city relying on the written report and its own self-assessment of that use of force without a identifiable complainant, which makes it more difficult to hold officers to account.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, Vadim is going to talk about our next item.
And I have one more and it'll be quick because I'm really curious now. This is to everybody in the room who might know, do the officers have a chance to do like maybe a mental health debrief during these long nights and days of, you know, being in this high agitation mode? Because I know from my community, that kind of adrenaline rush really messes with you emotionally after a certain amount of time. So I just wonder if there might be, you know, kind of like a safety check for officers that are in this high intense environment over time, like 6 hours, 2 hours, 4 hours? No? Yes?
Amy, what I can say is that EAP is made available to all of the officers. I think that the supervisors are very mindful of exactly the circumstances you're talking about. And so they're encouraged. You know, we have created a wellness program within the Bureau and offer, you know, lots of different options for the members to use in order to deal with those kind of stressors.
Oh, so their supervisors then are kind of like when they're on the, what I'm trying to get is a picture when they're on the scene, the supervisors can pretty much say, hey, look, you look like you've been out here too long. You're getting a little long in the tooth. Maybe you should go take a break. Do they ever do that on scene, or is everything just running until it's over?
Part of section 4 of our compliance report mentions that the city has agreed to adopt the ABLE program as active bystandership for law enforcement. It's based upon the New Orleans EPIC model, and it's a nationwide system that's now set up through Georgetown University Law Center. One of our former deputy chiefs is a professor there. She and Jonathan Aroney and a few others transplanted the New Orleans system to ABLE. Jonathan's the monitor in the New Orleans case. That program would offer what you seem to be talking about, Amy. It's the intervention where an individual who's online and sees their peer or their supervisor or whomever else performing in a way that shows they're maybe just a little bit too stressed out, it's, hey, take a break, I'll handle this one. Part of section 4 of our compliance report is to mention that the training plan for 2021 had a mention of ABLE, but had no plan for ABLE. And ABLE's got 10 conditions. Any police agency that wants to enact an ABLE program needs to have all 10. So coordinator, a policy, a training, et cetera. And that's just 2 in its infancy to show that PPB has implemented it, hasn't implemented yet. It's our understanding that PPB wants to implement that in 2021. They should do so. They should amend their training plan to show that, and they should substantively show all of the provisions of ABLE to show that the entire system's adopted. It's not a pick and choose. I'm only going to take one little piece of it. That's not how that program works. I'll post in the chat the ABLE link.
Yes, I would love to read up on it. Jared just mentioned something about it being introduced, but I wasn't here then, so I definitely want to look into it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If there isn't any other questions, I'm going to hand it over to Vadim. So thank you all for this discussion this evening. Okay, Vadim.
Thank you, Ann. So recently, PPB provided a draft directive 0640.80 on bias crime reporting. And as part of PCCEP's mission, we just want to bring this up in front of the community to see if anybody had any discussions, thoughts, changes they'd like to see made. Reading through the bias report. Oh, thank you, Claudia. Reading through the bias crime reporting directive, I'm actually pretty impressed myself with respect to how this is being addressed. As we know, this is an ongoing issue, and it's been highlighted recently in various communities across the United States. And certainly we've heard communities impacted here in Portland. Both in the central areas on the east side and on 82nd Street as well. So this is certainly a timely thing. And I guess it's an updated version of a previous directive on prejudice crime reporting. So it kind of focuses in on some of those issues. It certainly outlines the definitions and the intent behind the policy, provides the procedure on how individual officers that might be encountering these bias crimes would escalate those, and as well as take notes and save evidence for later prosecution. And as well as looks like supervisor detectives' responsibilities along with that, although I'm not sure whether that's completely different from their normal responsibilities under crime reporting or not. So overall, I personally, as reading through the bias crime directive, I didn't have any input myself. I just a couple questions at a later point in time, but I did want to just generally open it up to community input. If anybody here has any thoughts or questions about this particular directive. And because it's a small group, feel free to just chime in or raise your hand. The only hand I see is Barb's, and it might be left over from the previous discussion. And it was. So just my question for Mary Claire, in a personal capacity, I was told a couple of weeks ago, maybe give or take, that people had walked through Old Town, Chinatown area and had spray painted some epitaphs over there that were derogatory to a certain population that lives in the area. And I don't really know what happened after that. It was on several businesses that were minority-owned businesses in the area. If there's a spray paint or graffiti that specifically targets a demographic population based on at least what's defined as population involving bias crimes per this directive, is there some heightened sense of remediation for that in the city? I know for normal graffiti and spray paint, it might take quite a bit of time at this point to have the city clean it up. But for these specific things, do you know if there's a reporting structure to make sure that happens at in a quicker pace?
Vadim, I would just say that if we get that report, clearly the police would submit that to the district attorney for, prosecution as appropriate. They obviously make that determination, but I think there clearly is a heightened sensitivity to this type of behavior at present, especially, with regards to, certain cultural groups that, have been targeted of late. So it's always, at the forefront of, the officer and ultimately the detective who would follow up on that and do the investigation. So.
Okay. I mean, I assume there is, I just wasn't sure. It does mention here locating, I believe, somewhere in this directive, spray cans and following up on that sort of thing. I was just wondering with the remediation and the cleanup efforts, I would imagine that would be part of the reporting chain, but it is outside of the criminal aspect that PPB deals with. So that was just kind of a question based on things that I had personally been told about. I think in these sort of circumstances, sometimes it's hard to actually catch the individuals.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But to at least remediate things so that it's not a reminder, a constant reminder of bias crimes or hate crimes would be beneficial.
I think the city might have some. I'll get that information for you, Vadim. But I think there's actually, an organization within the city that might deal with remediating. I'm sorry if I misunderstood your initial question. I thought you meant did the police treat it to, but in terms of getting rid of graffiti, I think there's actually, a part of the city that deals with removal of graffiti, if that's what you're talking about.
That was what I was talking about.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I'll get you that.
There's actually a graffiti hotline. I can get you the phone number, and I can add that for sure for the red potties that are around town, the porta potties that Huckerp is part of putting out, which is the homeless urban camping reduction program for the city. They are making sure that they're cleaning up, quote, bad words off of those things, not worrying about like random stuff, but they said they specifically called out that they were making sure that stuff was being cleaned up. And I can definitely ask if that actually expands further from their group or where that lives.
Okay. Thank you. And once again, it just seems like the obvious answer to that one, but I really don't know. And then with respect to tracking, is there some mechanism by which the hate crimes are tracked by the Portland Police Bureau or bias crimes?
Yeah, I think SSD can track that based on the, the ORS that's alleged to have been, has cited as the violation. So as you see up here, 166, 165 is bias crime in the first degree. So if that were, they could track the statistics, through the type of crime that is charged.
Yeah, it says tracking in the record management system, and
Yeah.
Is that
Same as we'd know how many burglaries, how many robberies, how many rapes, whatever. It's just a way, when it's entered, we'd be able to track that. And I think actually there may be, Heidi, do you remember, I think there's actually a requirement that those, that's tracked and reported to the state now too, if I'm not mistaken. Once again, Vadim, I'll check and see if what my memory serves me, but I believe that we're tracking those for purposes of the state as well.
I think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
I attended a meeting not too long ago of United Against Hate, or rather a meeting where representatives from United Against Hate were present, and they mentioned that there has been a fairly tremendous spike in hate crimes over the last year or so. And I'm wondering, and then you don't have to answer this, I don't expect you to have the knowledge of that at this meeting, but whether that's correlated to the reporting that y'all are seeing as well. So that's the reason I asked. Okay. Yeah, there's this particular directive seems to be a really good one. Let me see. I haven't seen anything about this from Portland Cop Watch. Is Barbara still here? Yeah, Barbara, have you all looked at this at all or given this any thought? Going once, going twice.
Sorry, I was talking with the mic off. I have not. Now, are you referring specifically to the hate crimes?
Correct. There's the new directive that's being posted for review on bias crimes or hate crimes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we did look at that. We liked some of the wording, I remember. But if you want, we can go over it again.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if I usually I see those emails from Mr. Handelman, and I didn't see this one in particular. So maybe he agrees with this one. Okay.
I'm sure we heard from him.
Yeah, we did. If I'm not sure which if it's the directive I'm thinking about, we did reply to it and in a positive way.
Okay, great.
If it's the exact same one, sometimes there's so many things going on. It's
Okay.
I have a quick question, if I may. Mary Claire, has the Bureau, I know there has been some implicit bias training for the officers. Is that also in your training efforts? Is that being kind of revamped as well?
Yeah, the equity training going on currently, and it's not just for officers, it's for all members of the Bureau, actually. But yes, as a matter of fact, as part of the in-service this year, there's racial equity training going on through Marlon's office, who's met with you guys before too. So the Office of Equity and EIO, Equity and Inclusion Office, is handling that.
Yes, I know he's, I think I heard him speaking about the implicit bias training that he was rolling out to all officers. And I'm wondering, is that in the yearly or is that starting in June as well?
No, it's part of the in-service, but part of those are being done on our learning management system. And so they're being distributed on a monthly basis rather than all at once. So he did an introduction, and now, and then for each month he will have a particular segment. He has community members speaking to, to the Bureau and stuff like that. So each month is another, segment of his, plan basically, but it goes over the course of the time. So in-service ran from January and it ends, I believe, May 13th. So we'll have monthly LMS classes on that probably through June or maybe even July, because he might have gotten a little late start.
And are those mandatory? Is attendance?
Yes. Yes. So on our LMS system, everybody gets, notice that they're required to do it. They have a certain period, and then they have to read and acknowledge that they have, participated in the training and sign off on it. So all of that is tracked.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, and that's all I had as well. It seems like there's no other community input. Do you want to continue with the rest of the agenda, Ann?
Thanks, Vadim.
And thanks, Mary Claire, for answering those questions.
Yeah. What we wanted to do in our closing was talk about that we are going to be moving this meeting to the second Thursday of each month, starting next month. It will be 5 to 6:30. Our meeting will be May 13th. We're doing that to involve more PCCEP members. Zainab Volk is going to be joining our group, and that works better for her schedule. So that will be on our website and in all our materials going forward. And I think also at that meeting, at our first meeting, we're going to talk about kind of some new ideas that she has in terms of the direction of our subcommittee. And so we hope that people come and join in that conversation. And I think if anyone else has anything to say, if not, we're going to close out early tonight. Vadim, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a general question for everybody. We have quite a few regular people, regular attendees of our meetings, and I'm wondering whether that would pose any problem for anybody. The second Thursday, at what time was it, Ann? As you're drinking water, of course.
Sorry. It's 5 to 6:30.
Yeah,
So it's the same time. It's just, excuse me about my voice. It's just a different day. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month. Now we're changing it to the second Thursday, 1 day difference.
Yeah, we'd certainly like to make sure that those are the individuals that want to attend our meeting, and especially on PPB and DOJ and the city, can also join. Would anybody have a problem with that time frame or a conflict for that?
I thought you said third Thursday.
The second Thursday.
Ann and Vadim, can I just suggest just a quick reminder, and I can remind you guys as well again on the 27th, to just make that part of your guys' subcommittee report, just to let folks at the full board know that this change will be starting in May.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for all your assistance this evening.
Okay, well, good meeting. Thanks everybody for coming and attending and presenting for some of you and answering our questions. And see you